Hey everyone, Steve from Backcountry Gallery here, and this time around, I want to talk about the incredible impact picking the proper vertical point of view, in other words, your camera height, has on wildlife photography, although I suppose the tips in this video go well beyond just wildlife. I know, you're tempted to stop the video and move on because you've probably heard something like this before. However, this is probably going to dive a little bit deeper, so I hope you'll stick around because the truth is, using the advice in this video can transform your photography overnight. So stick with me and I'll demonstrate how choosing a proper height perspective will effectively catapult you from snapshots to artwork. Plus, I'll pass along some tips to make it easier to pull off in the field. First, let's cover the basics of how perceived subject height affects the story when viewing a photograph. And there are three main ways it does this. All of them are centered around the relationship of the camera height to the subject's eye. Number one, above the subject's eye level. When a viewer looks at a photo taken from above eye level, they feel as if they are dominating the animal and are less connected to the subject visually. This feeling generally increases the higher above the subject you are. There's a reason the phrase, looking down at somebody, has a negative connotation. 99% of the time, a wildlife photo improves when you use one of the other two options we're going to discuss. However, there are always exceptions, and using an angle above the subject is sometimes a useful technique if you have the right subject and situation. For example, in this photo, I wanted the viewer to feel like they had a measure of control over this little golden mantled ground squirrel since he looked like he was begging for a snack. By shooting at a higher angle, it visually shifts power and control to the viewer and makes the little guy feel a little more helpless than he really is. Still, this is seldom my go-to point of view. Not only do I generally dislike a domineering perspective for wildlife, it's also a terribly common way to shoot. Most snapshots are taken from this kind of perspective. Additionally, you often lose interesting background elements and the image can feel like it's lacking depth. Number two, at the subject's level. When a photo is captured at or very near eye level, the feeling between the viewer and the subject changes dramatically. It gives the viewer a feeling of connection and engagement with the animal that stems from the equality that naturally arises when you are at the same height. It allows them to gauge the subject's emotion at a more intimate level than when shooting from above. It makes them feel more like a kindred spirit than a mere observer. It's akin to stepping into that subject's world on its own terms and at its own viewpoint. When done properly, it can sometimes make the viewer feel like a fellow member of that species, so it's a very powerful technique. When you shoot at eye level, you are literally creating a bond that thrusts your viewer into the animal's head. Well, this works well with larger animals. It's especially potent with the smaller ones since most people view smaller animals from a standing position. When your photograph shows them what it's like to be at the same height as that animal, to be in its world, it's like magic. In addition, it also offers a unique opportunity to make your images look a little bit different than the ones we typically see of that species, particularly for small animals, since the vast majority of photographers don't try to get to eye level. As an additional note, I also find that this perspective helps enhance the general impression of an animal. For instance, if you have a cute little bunny, getting low can help reinforce and enhance that feeling of cuteness. On the other hand, if you're at eye level with a predatory or dangerous species, eye level shots can enhance the threatening nature of the animal in question. Eye to eye with a lion is more likely to trigger a primal chill in your viewer than a shot of the same lion from like a higher angle. Number three, below the subject's eye level. This is often a very powerful tool as well, but it takes the right subject. When the viewer position is lower than the subject's eye level, the subject feels like it's dominating the viewer or even the territory. It can make the subject seem powerful, majestic, and in charge of his domain, and can make the viewer feel more vulnerable and sometimes a little bit out of control depending on the shot. An upward perspective can also make the subject feel more idolized and important, like these lions looking over their domain. It can also have the effect of making the viewer feel smaller and a little bit less significant, like they are only a tiny part of a bigger world. One way I like to leverage this is when I have a large, dangerous animal in the viewfinder, like this elephant. In this photo, the elephant looms large in the frame, and he feels like he could stomp the viewer right off the census if the notion struck him. In addition, there are some distant elephants in the back that look small in comparison to the big guy up front that add to this feeling. This is also fun to do with smaller subjects since we seldom see them from a below eye level perspective in real life, and it gives the photo a fun feeling. Having this little frog at a slightly higher angle makes it feel like he's the master of his little world. Just one cautionary note, just make sure not to get so low that the horizon slices through the subject at an odd place, like, right through the neck or something. My choice? The height I use really depends on the situation and the story I'm trying to tell. For the most part, I tend to favor eye level or just a bit lower. I seldom go super low and only rarely shoot from a position that makes it look like I'm shooting down and dominating the animal. Still, these are all just visual communication tools, and you should leverage them to tell the kind of story you want to share about the subject. The reason I like eye level or just a little bit lower is because I usually want the viewer to form a connection with the subject, not to look upon it as some object to dominate. I think these emotional connections are what really draw people into a wildlife shot. I often try to get just a tiny bit below eye level when possible, since it adds to the feeling of importance without making the subject feel like it's really dominating the viewer the way it would with a truly low angle perspective. In addition, eye level shots help create depth and dimension, and I'll demonstrate it with this little porcelain raccoon since, getting living animals to cooperate with test shots is always tricky. Now here's how it works. The more you have to tip your camera downward, the more you line up the sensor and focal plane with the ground. In this shot, I was at 400mm and standing. Not only does a high camera viewpoint increase the feeling of domination over the animal, but it also means that the ground in front of and in back of your subject starts taking on the role of a close, sharp background, and that viewpoint often sabotages any feeling of dimension in the photo. On the other hand, when you drop to eye level and your sensor is squared up to the animal, apparent depth of field falls off quickly, and it allows you to pick up a more distant background if one is available. This photo was from the same position and using the same focal length as the first. The only difference is that I went to the ground to capture it. As you can see, this instantly adds a sense of depth to your photo. Although our example is with a subject on the ground, it applies equally well to subjects of a taller stature, although I do think it's often more dramatic for ground level subjects. So what happens if you want to get to eye level, but you just can't do it? Maybe you're in a vehicle and you can't get out without scaring the animal away. Maybe the ground is a stinking green muck and you're not about to lie on your belly in that stuff, or heck, maybe you fall into the paradigm where getting low isn't the problem. It's getting back up. Well, good news. I have a few tricks to help keep you off the ground. 1. Use longer glass. This is my go-to when I can't get as low as I want. Whenever we point our lens at a subject, we create a line between our lens and our target. If you're trying to get an eye-level look to your shot, getting back and using a longer lens can help. For instance, take a look at these two illustrations. On the left, we're close to our subject with a short lens, and you can see the angle it creates is quite steep and will result in an image where it looks like we are really shooting down on our subject. Again, there are times that perspective can work, but in my experience, those are few and far between. Now, take a look at the image on the right. This time we're using a longer lens from a greater distance, but at the same height as the one on the left. Although it's never going to look quite as good as a true eye-level shot, it's a noticeable improvement over shooting closer with short glass. Depending on the animal, this technique can often give the appearance of a more or less eye-level shot to the viewer. Note that this is obviously tougher to pull off with ground-level animals. It usually works better with taller specimens, but every little advantage helps, and you can often combine this technique with some of the others I'm about to share. Or maybe just, you can kneel down or squat down a little bit to get partway to the ground, but not all the way. As a side note, I often use this technique when shooting from a safari vehicle. Although I can often technically have the driver get within like 100mm range of a subject, staying back and using a longer lens helps maintain that feeling of shooting from eye level. 2. Use the LCD. I use this technique all the time, and probably 2/3 of the low-to-ground photos you see from me were captured as I knelt down and used the LCD on the back of the camera. I just pop out the LCD screen and have the rig on a low tripod. Sometimes I handhold using the lens foot, or sometimes I just set the entire thing on the ground. From there, I position my AF point on the subject's eye and fire away. It's not as easy as viewfinder shooting, but it's worth taking the time to practice and learn. By the way, mirrorless cameras with subject detection make this 100 times easier. My usual technique is to use auto AF with Nikon or wide AF with Sony, have the camera set for subject detection, pre-focus at about the same range as my subject so the camera doesn't lock onto the wrong thing, and then focus and fire, letting the camera do the heavy lifting of chasing the subject's eye. By the way, I also use my LCD to lean out of the sides of boats or kayaks to get nice low perspectives over the water. Just exercise caution in areas where predators lurk below the surface. You don't want a croc, gator, or hippo emerging from the murky depths and grabbing on. 3. Position yourself at a lower elevation. Another trick I use all the time is trying to position myself lower than my animal by using the terrain. I do this both in and out of the vehicle. For example, I was actually standing for this prairie dog shot. He was on the top of a hill above me, so I was able to leverage the terrain for both a bit of cover and as a means for a ground level looking shot without my belly being anywhere near the ground. I use the same trick in a more limited capacity while in vehicles too, often looking for low spots when I pull over to shoot from the car. 4. Animals down a hill. So what about an animal that's downhill from you? The trick here is to get the camera as low as you can and make sure it's as squared up to the hill as you can make it. This effectively makes the hill appear as flat ground in relation to your subject and can net you an eye level looking shot. In fact, take this little fox. Looks like I was at eye level, right? Nope. He was easily 6 or 7 feet lower than I was. However, because I was able to keep my lens low and parallel to the hill, it appears the image was captured at eye level. As photographers, it's our job to convey the feelings we had about our subject to our viewers, and using height is one of the most potent tools in our toolbox. I hope this video has helped. For even more advice on getting the most from your gear and your time in the field, make sure to check out my educational materials. I have tons of books and video workshops that are chock full of advice to help you nail award-winning images every time you're in the field. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.